Let's start way back. We're talking 445 BC. A man named Nima needed to travel to the kingdom of Judea to help rebuild Jerusalem. So, the king of Persia handed him a set of letters, essentially saying that this guy is cool, let him go through. This is considered the earliest form of passports. Around the same time, ancient Rome had its own version. Travelers could carry letters from officials, granting them safe movement across the empire. In China, with the Han dynasty, as far back as 206 BC, used document that listed the bearer's age, heights, physical features to verify identity across borders and checkpoints. So the ID is ancient, but these weren't passport in the way that we know them today. They were close to what we call visas, a letter granting permission to enter somewhere, usually granted by whoever in charge of that territory. The document you carried to prove who you are. That what came in the letter. In England, during the early Middle Ages, if you wanted to travel abroad, you needed something called the King License. No license, no leaving. In 1215, the Magna Carta actually pushed back on this. It said that anyone except criminals should be free to leave the country. But that freedom did not last that long. The Crown quietly took back control. Now, here's the fun part. Where does the word passport even come from? The first written use of the actual word passport in English law appeared in 1414, Act of Parliament, under the King Henry V. Henry V is often credited with inventing the passport in something closer to a modern sense, a document that helped his subject prove their identity in foreign lands. But the etymology is disputed. Some historians say it comes from the English word pass and port, as in permission to pass through a seaport. Others say it's French, from the passer, to pass, and porte, city gate. In 1420, France King Louis XI started issuing certificates allowing free movement of merchants, British origin or French origin. The passport is out here, with identity crisis before it even gets started. Here where things get darker. France, during the 17th century and 18th century, developed one of the most intense passport systems in history. And it wasn't just international travelers. Peasants were required to carry letters of permission just to leave their local area. You couldn't move towns without papers. These internal passports systems were eventually abolished in 1792 during the French Revolution because freedom, liberty, but then reinstated just 3 years later because, frankly, chaos and mass immigration made the government nervous. This tension, passport as freedom versus passport as control, is the theme that runs through the entire history of this document. Meanwhile, the newly independent United States started issuing travel documents in 1780 to Americans traveling to cities like Paris and London. These were simple, one-page document, but here's the wild part. There was no central authority. Individual cities could issue their own passport. New York could issue one, Philadelphia could issue one. It was a mess. By 1865, the US Congress finally put a stop to that and gave the Department of State the authority to issue passports. Government officials who issued American passport to non-citizens could be fined or fired. Here's the moment everything changed. But to understand why it was such a shock, we need to understand what the world looked like before 1914. Because honestly, it looked nothing like what we used to today. Imagine this. You are European in 1890. You want to travel, say from Paris to Vienna, or from Naples to New York. You pack your bag, buy your ticket, board a train or a steamship, and nobody asks for a single document. No passport, no visa, no border agents drifting through your bag. You just go. That was the reality of most of Western world through the half century before World War One. George Orwell writing in 1944 reflected on this lost era with genius astonishment. He noted that until 1914, you didn't need a passport for almost any country except Russia. A European immigrant, he wrote, could escape together a few pounds for a ship passage, sail to America or Australia, and when they arrive, no question were asked. Let that sink in. You could just show up in America, no papers, no approval, no queue. Why did this happen? To start, the railway revolution. So, how did the world get this open in the first place? Railroad and steamships. Starting around 1860, Europe went through a railway construction boom that transformed the continent almost overnight. What had once been a multi day carriage journey became a matter of hours. And crucially, trains didn't respect borders. A single train might cross 3 to 4 national boundaries in a single trip. Enforcing passport control on every passenger at the border became practically impossible. The sheer volume of people moving around made the old system break down. France actually led the way in 1860. They abolished passport control, all their land frontiers. Most other European countries followed suit. Belgium, historically one of the most liberal nations in Europe, never even established passport control in the first place. And it wasn't just tourism. Between 1850 and 1920, around 55 million Europeans left the continent by sea. Most headed to the Americas. Steamships made the ocean travel affordable for working class for the first time in history. The railways fed people to the ports, the ports fed them to the ships, and the ships dropped them in places like New York, Buenos Aires, Sydney, with essentially no paperwork required on either end. This was the golden age of globalization, and it was staggering in scale. The Austrian writer Stefan Zegwig, who lived through both worlds, described the before and after with heartbreaking clarity. Before World War One, he traveled to India and America without even needing a passport. He wrote that travelers simply entered and left countries, asked no questions, and were asked none. They didn't fill in one of the hundred of paper forms that would later become standard. He called it essentially the golden age of the individual. Now, we should be careful not to romanticize this too much. This open world had a dark side. The freedom of movement was largely for white Europeans. By 1880, anti-Asian immigrants law in the United States and Australia had severely restricted movement for Chinese and other Asian workers, many of whom have helped build the very railway making their travel possible. The borderless world was in many ways a borderless world for some people and heavily bordered for others. But within Europe and for the European immigrant heading to the New World, the openness was real and it was radical by modern standards. The wall comes down in August 1914. Then, in the summer of 1914, a single incident in Sarajevo set off a chain of events that ended the era. Almost overnight, within weeks of war being declared, France, Germany, and Italy made passport mandatory. Neutral countries like Spain, Denmark, and Switzerland quickly followed. Governments that had spent decades relaxing border control suddenly reversed course entirely. The logic was simple and terrifying. Spies were real, enemy nations were real, and you could no longer afford to let people just wander in. It wasn't just about keeping people out, it was also about keeping people in. Government needed men for the front. They couldn't have skilled workers or military age men quickly slipping through borders. The passport became the tool for both exclusion and conscription. In the United States, passports became mandatory for travel in May 1818 and were required until 1921 when things calmed down. But here's the thing that historians often point out. Government expected this to be temporary, a wartime measure, something they rolled back once peace returned. They didn't. The fear that they had created the new passport system outlasted the war itself. The Russian Revolution of 1917 sent shockwaves through Europe. Suddenly, governments were terrified of revolutionary ideas spreading across borders as much as enemy soldiers. Nationalism was on the rise. The easy cosmopolitanism of the pre war felt naive, even dangerous. By the time the fighting stopped, the bureaucrat machinery of border control was already too deeply embedded to dismantle. What's fascinating and kind of tragic is that the international community tried to reverse it in 1919. The Treaty of Versailles actually included a commitment for member states to restore the freedom of movement. A year later, the 1920 Paris Conference on the passport organized by the newly formed League of Nations explicitly acknowledged that restriction on movement was damaging personal relations between people and creating a serious obstacle to economic development of the world. They wanted to go back to the open world. They just couldn't figure out because here's the catch 22 that one scholar described perfectly. Although many countries wanted to get rid of passport because a few countries wouldn't give them up, no country could afford to give them up either. If your neighbors check a document at their border, you can't just wave everyone through yours. Fences, as it turns out, are easier to build than to dismantle. The League of Nations didn't manage to create a standardized booklet design and agreed upon guidelines from those conferences and follow-ups meeting in 1926 and 1927 redefined further. One major addition from this era, mandatory photographs. Before that, passport just described you in text. Brown hair, medium height, unremarkable nose. Good luck using that to catch a spot. The dream of returning to a passport free world quietly died. Somewhere in the interyears, buried under rising nationalism, economic patriotism, and gathering storm of the Second World War, here's something that often gets glossed over. In the standard passport history for a long time, travel documents were mostly for the wealthy elite, and almost exclusively for white and American men. Women often couldn't get passport independently. In the US, a married woman was listed on her husband's passport until well into the 20th century. For Black Americans and other marginalized groups, passport actually became a symbol of something bigger. When civil rights were being denied at home, a passport was a proof of full citizenship and a ticket to opportunities abroad that were being blocked at home. The passport, in this sense, meant different things to different people. Freedom to some, control to others. After World War II, passport became essentially universal requirement. In 1952, US law changed to require all American citizens to have a passport to depart and re-enter the country. A 1978 amendment made it flat out illegal to enter and leave the United States without one, even in peacetime. So, where are we now? Today, passport is a marvel of security engineering. We're talking microchip, biometric data, ultraviolet reactive ink, laser perforated holograms, overlays. Your face isn't just a photo anymore. It's a digital file matched against databases at Border Control, the International Civil Aviation Organization, or the ICAO, now sets the global standard for passport, which is why you'll notice similarity in the look and format of passports from almost every country. That little symbol on the cover, the one that looks like a tiny camera, that means It's a biometric passport. And yet, for all that sophistication, the fundamental purpose hasn't changed since Nehemiah walked to Jerusalem with the king of Persia led him. It's still just someone important saying, this person who they say they are, led them through. So, when did the passport become a thing? The concept is 2,500 years ago. The world, 1440, standardization was started as a king's letter of safe passage, became the most powerful document most people will ever own. And the debate over whether it represents freedom or control is still very much alive. And the debate over what it represents, freedom or control, is still very much alive.